this conversation, if it were posted on social media after the online safety bill has passed, could easily fall foul as legal but harmful, because some people watching it will find it offensive. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that at the moment Christianity's under some attack in the UK. It's become unfashionable. Self-censorship is the greatest threat we have to free speech at the moment, not the cancellers. They're kind of out there, we can see them. It's the impact it has, the chilling effect of making people go, do you know what, maybe I won't say that.
Well, Claire Fox, Baroness Fox of Buckley, thank you for joining us today. You're a fascinating person. Because you're a former member of the Revolutionary Communist Party, a former Brexit Party MEP. You now sit in the House of Lords as an independent. You are in favour of abortion, but you're against assisted suicide. You are an atheist by your own assessment, but you strongly defend religious freedoms. Some people might say that you're difficult to pigeonhole. What is it that drives you? What is it that unifies your views on all these issues?
I think probably personal autonomy and freedom. And I don't think there's an inconsistency around something like assisted dying or assisted suicide, which from a humanist point of view, it seems to me, it's very important that one is attendant to life and the importance of life. And the issues around abortion are contentious in terms of when life starts. And so without rehearsing that would be the distinction. And it actually irritates me that people imagine that you can take an issue and assume you know based on somebody's religion, or make a point that people will say, oh, that's a religious issue, when it might be a moral issue, and that is not confined to religious people. And actually, there are people of faith and religion who are inconsistent on those issues as well. So, you know, where does it leave you? So sometimes that, oh, well, why would you take that position as an atheist on a religious issue, is because there's a way of trying to delegitimize an issue by simply writing it off as, oh, it's just the religious type to go with that. So that irritates me. And just on religious freedom, I just think it's the bedrock of all freedoms. And, you know, if you can't in a secular society defend religious freedom, then actually you're always holding back on what a free society should be. So that's why I think it's important, because people will say, I believe in free speech, but I don't want those religious fruitcakes over there to have their say. And I just think that's a way of limiting your position on freedom.
So you were brought up a Roman Catholic?
Yeah.
Do you mind me asking, to what extent do you think your views are a reflection of that upbringing, and to what extent are your views a rejection of that upbringing?
Well, I think that my upbringing was important because I went to a Catholic comprehensive school, fairly bog standard as it were, but it had a very lively attitude to discussion and debate, which I really appreciated. And in some ways, you know, Catholics were a minority. You know, a lot of Irish Catholics in the area at the time, because of the period that we were in. A fair bit of hostility to Irish Catholics in some ways. But one of the things was because it was a minority religion and because of its social context, we were encouraged to have to argue a positive case for the tenets of Catholicism,
right,
rather than it being a sort of default position. So, you know, it wasn't just a question of kind of rehearse your catechism, but it was, well, what would you say if people said this, or how would you argue this? So that introduced me to the idea of having to defend the arguments that you put forward and being against the grain. So that's very important. And I mean, I can't explain anything other than I had a sense of community there. I was influenced by things like liberation theology. I went off to Thèse. I met, you know, which is a a religious, religious retreat in France. I won't go into that, but therefore that was my first kind of trip abroad, and I met all these interesting international people, and I became aware of things like liberation theology and the broader demands on being a Catholic. So this is all when I'm like 15, 16. So I mean, that could not but influence me, could it? So it did influence me. And the other thing is that I have a lot of respect for, I understand things like tradition, and I have a respect for people of faith, because I didn't see it as a rejection. This is the point I'm making. I simply don't have a faith in God, right? But that's not the same as saying that I am contemptuous of those who do.
Now, speaking of your attitude towards other people's opinions, you've made a career out of defending free speech. You defend people's freedom to say things that other people find offensive. You've written a book, I Find That Offensive, which I know they re-released it as I Still Find That Offensive. And you talk in the book about how thin-skinned people shout about their feelings simply in order to shut down other people expressing opinions that they don't like. How have we got to the stage in the English-speaking world where so many people just can't seem to cope with the idea that other people might have opinions?
Well, I do think that one of the really sad parts of contemporary society is that we tend to see this as generational, and actually that's what the book's about. Young people in particular are, you might say, thin-skinned, or find it more difficult, this idea of a diversity of opinions and just arguing it out. But I do think that we've socialised them that way, so I blame my generation and generations after and before me,
right,
because we've introduced young people to this concept of harm that goes way beyond what J.S. Mill talked about when he talked about the harm principle, which was, free speech unless it's harmful, and he would mean, somebody who maliciously shouted fire in a crowded theatre and everybody ran out and there's no fire. But harm has now been pathologized in a way and broadened out into this concept of psychological harm. And then we say to young people that they are going to face all these harms in life, and we overprotect them from all these existential harms. We tell them that safety is the prime value, and that they are victims of all sorts of harms and that they're going to be protected. Now, the difficulty with all of this rhetoric is that it actually starts to realise itself in young people being reared in a way that makes them think that they're under attack all the time, and that they need to be protected all the time and they need to be kept safe. And I think that by the time they get to university, it's no surprise that they end up setting up safe spaces and demanding that universities to protect them from harms. But the other, you can see how it's happened at that level. But I think that also there was a complacency on the left and on the right about the importance of free speech in terms of politics. And certainly, and I'm from the left, as you've indicated, the left also, it's a sort of way of cheating. So, you got to a point where you thought, well, it's very difficult to convince the majority of people to support something like a fight against racism or fights for unpopular causes or what have you. So what we'll do is we'll close down people who are arguing against us rather than trying to win the arguments, and discredit those people. And you can see it happening where they institutionalise protection of different groups, through basically saying we're going to look after you, and by limiting the speech of others. And that's one of the ways it happens. We won't allow that debate to happen in case we lose it, which is unhelpful.
Right.
And I think that that's a cowardly approach. The other thing is identity politics. Identity politics has emerged as a great challenge to anyone who's kind of got a universalist or humanist approach. It's a real challenge to all Enlightenment thinking. It's actually a challenge to the notion of equality and rights, it basically certainly says that you as an individual don't count. You only count as an exhibit of the particular group you're in. So I as a woman, and then you claim to be part of this group. And that then sets up a competition between different identities. Once we've decided that you're going to protect those different identity groups through limiting the speech of others, you get a competition to limit speech of everybody. At the same time as this kind of therapeutic ethos has entered in to the way we rear children, over protection, there's a kind of huge storm in the middle there.
So what can we do about it?
Well, first of all, even though it sounds silly, naming it's quite important, because one of the things that I found when I brought the book out, and it's really intensified, is people actually argued that I was exaggerating the problem, and that, you know, I was just moaning and whinging about young people because I was an old person, and that students have always been, you know, revolting and up in arms and awkward squad, that things haven't really changed. There's an attempt at gaslighting you. I mean, effectively to say to you, if you talk about free speech, that, you know, the concept of gaslighting, which is to make you feel as though you're going mad by sort of saying, look, what is there to see here? And so even having the arguments about the reality of the assaults on free speech, the intensification of the attacks on free speech is helpful. And then also to explain why you need to allow people not to have the right to speak. I think we miss a trick when we don't emphasise the right to listen. The right as an individual to hear a wide range of opinions so that we can form our own opinion. And you can't form your own opinion if you've only heard 2 opinions in your life. Yeah. If you've never read a book. I mean, you know, you need to be exposed to a wide range of opinions. You've said that I'm hard to, you know, you've indicated through headlines that the changes that I've had. Well, that obviously requires having arguments with people. It means that I, you know, believed one thing and then I read about it and I reflected on it and I argued with people and I changed my position. And unless you imagine that you're going to have the same outlook on life that you had when you were 16 as when you're 60, that nothing will ever disturb you, you have to then say, well, actually, I want to be open to as wide a group of opinions as possible so that I can negotiate my way morally, so I can take ownership in a morally autonomous way of who I am and what I believe. Therefore, I'm going to pick and mix and listen. Yeah. That's why.
I mean, I say this to Christians. I mean, I wasn't always a Christian. I wasn't brought up a Christian. I became a Christian. So I went from a position of not agreeing with the Christian faith to agreeing with it. You know, I experienced a change of mind. And then, as you say, whether it's as part of a Christian faith or anything else in life, hopefully you grow and you change for the better. And that's never going to happen if you never hear any opinions other than the ones you already hold.
It's also essential for democracy. I mean, democracy, which I appreciate, is becoming unfashionable these days. And people are kind of, you know, democracy, but we don't like the voters type thing. I mean, you know, it's a real shame that the voters won't do what we tell them to do. But actually, the very nature of politics, political change and democratic change, is that you have options. Is that you, and I don't just mean options in a narrow sense of choose between these 2 political parties. I mean, that's rather dull. But that actually you're presented with a variety of clashing visions of the future, and you choose which is most convincing. Now, if there's only one way, if you basically ring fence off whole ranges of life and say, no, that's not up for democratic discussion, you have to only go with this orthodoxy, you're not allowed to think anything else, then, you know, why not go for a one-party state? Let's cut out the democratic bit, you know, because you then will say that the enlightened know best. And if the enlightened know best, then this is the way that, you know, the Chinese Communist Party basically said, you know, we're not, they will actually say, you know, we're not anti the people, we just feel that they don't want to be bothered by all this, you know, kerfuffle around choice and decision making, and we have got the time and the energy to decide what is the best way forward, so we'll decide for them. I mean, that's effectively, nobody says, I'm a dictator and I'm going to stop you having views. I mean, it's always a kind of more benign presentation. Now, I am a Democrat, and I believe that that is a a way of organising society that gives maximum outlet for that individual autonomy and for the idea of the history-making individual and the capacity to change oneself. So I would be of the opinion that even if I lose democratically, say in a vote, or I can't convince the majority of people, that's my fault. I have to improve my arguments rather than try to shut down my opposition.
So recently in the House of Lords, you defended the freedom of church schools to effectively to teach the Christian faith in their own schools, and the freedom of church schools to recruit senior staff who share the faith of the school in order to maintain that ethos. Now, the Christian Institute was instrumental in helping get those laws on the statute book, so we were very grateful and relieved that the government, agreed that the law should remain as it is. But why did you think it was important to defend those particular freedoms?
Well, I mean, first of all, they were under assault, and I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that at the moment Christianity's under some attack in the UK. It's become unfashionable. And even in the House of Lords, where Christianity is represented by bishops, I think I don't need to say that I wouldn't necessarily trust the Christian faith with the bishops in the House of Lords. Let's put it that way. I mean, it's a kind of ambivalent situation. They're going to be saying all sorts of things. Anyway, but it's a little bit like we said about religious freedom. I have noticed that in every single debate that it's become fashionable to attack people because they're religious. And when I say that it's fashionable to attack people because they're religious, often that is confined to Christianity, sadly, because when you try and raise some problems, and there are problems, by the way, of religious, strongly religious people using their religion to try and close down debate, as we saw with recently the Queen of Heaven film, which was closed down effectively by people who, a particular group of Muslims, who, rather than all Muslims, to make that clear, certainly extremists, but basically enacted a blasphemy law by saying the film shouldn't be shown, by having big demonstrations and threatening the cinemas, and the cinemas collapsing in the face of that, and Cineworld saying we won't show the film. That wasn't mentioned hardly in Parliament at all. I put in several urgent questions and nobody was interested in it. In that instance, I would have been attacking religions or organised religions' attempt at vetoing what should be artistic freedom. So you're not allowed to do that. So there are certain kind of like silent ring fencing of not criticising religion. But when it comes to Christianity, there has been more open season. There's no doubt about it. It's all wrapped up partly with feeling that this is part of the British Empire. It's part of the decolonisation issue. It's a bit like, Christianity is associated with missionaries and going to the developing world and stamping authority on them. I mean, there's all sorts of tangled webs there. And there's just a disagreement with the morality that comes with Christianity around things like abortion, maybe with assisted dying, but other issues. So that in colleges and student unions, it becomes sort of routine to assume that a Christian union or a pro-life group shouldn't be affiliated with the student union because that's bigotry. It's just kind of said as though that's true. So I'm just saying that I wasn't even going to speak on that point in the House of Lords. But when I realised that there was an attack on it, I thought it was very important to make the point that, of course it's appropriate that if you've got a religious school at all, which I'm perfectly happy with a diversity of the types of schools that are available, that you should be able to have religious teaching and also religious teachers. But I also made the point that there's an illiteracy around religion that actually has an impact culturally and socially, and made a quip, but it was because it had made such an impact on me when I was a teacher that when I was trying to teach a poem and I basically said something like, what might that apple symbolise? And all the students looked at me and I didn't know what I was talking about. And I realised that they had no concept of the apple and temptation, or they had no. So even from a point of view of cultural capital,
Garden of Eden.
You can't. The Garden of Eden. You can't understand art. You're going to miss out on huge swathes of literature if you haven't got any of the references to the Bible that we would have been familiar with, even if you were an atheist in the past. A lot of these artists, by the way, weren't even religious, but they understood religious symbolism and understood what it stood for beyond religion. So I think that at any level, we would do well to not throw religion out when it comes to education.
And just picking up on that theme of religious illiteracy, do you think that religious literacy is common amongst politicians and civil servants, and do you think that that's why so many of them unthinkingly support a conversion therapy ban without much thought about how it's drafted and whether it could go too far and trample on religious freedom? Because they just don't think much about those issues.
Well, sadly, I don't even know that that's the explanation, because I think quite a lot of people who are religious are very nervous about arguing against the conversion therapy ban or the new bill that's coming up, because they're frightened people will think that they are because they're religious. So there's a defensiveness there. So one of the things that I think, but I do think it's true that people are maybe not familiar with the workings of religious organisations, and therefore they have all sorts of lurid imaginings about what goes on. And for me, the conversion therapy bill is, first of all, it's entirely unnecessary. The removal of the threat around gender critical issues, or rather around young people with gender dysphoria, could have been caught up in this if anybody was a psychotherapist and talking to them, or a teacher, or trying to help them get their way through what has become a kind of social contagion of gender dysphoria in schools in particular, but at any level, and we know the controversy around that. It was almost as though if that could be removed, then it'll be all right, because now we can make sure that we're only stopping those people who are involved in gay conversion therapy. But we know that gay conversion therapy is a bit of a myth. I mean, where is it being practiced in the UK? And what it amounts to in many instances is either the kind of lurid imaginings that you kind of are dragged into church and you say, I think I might be gay, and people are beating you. And so it could be that religious illiteracy means that people imagine things happening in churches just aren't happening. But also because there's a lack of understanding that some people might voluntarily, through their own autonomy, make a decision, give their consent to feeling uncomfortable about a sexuality that they feel goes against their religious faith. And people just can't get their heads around that. And I think that, and I can get my head around that, because I understand that there will be people who will go to prayer groups and say, pray that I stop having these feelings. Or can you help me with these difficult feelings that go against my faith? I mean, I think they're bonkers and they should get out of the church. That's my view, right? But that's not the point, is it? The point is, it's not up to me to tell people what they should believe or what their faith should tell them. It's up to them to decide that. And if they want to go and go on a retreat and join a prayer group, if they want to raise the problems they're feeling, I mean, it might not be that they've been prayed over or whatever, but if they want to say, I feel conflicted, and somebody talks to them sympathetically about what the church says, what the Bible says, that's their doctrine and their church. And if they're part of that, we should let them get on with it. That's as simple as that. The reason why it's not being touched by people in the parliamentary estate, either the Commons or the Lords, I think, is because they're so frightened of being called bigots. I mean, it's the worst thing, and it is horrible. I mean, to have the bigotry word thrown at you can be career devastating, but personally, one's reputation matters. You know, I don't. I had a lot of this around Brexit. I mean, I was horrified. There I was, a kind of Radio 4 lovey, you know, a bit of a lefty, doing the Moral Maze, on the Moral Maze for 20 years, you know, kind of a bit cranky, as people understood it, but all right. And because they discovered that I was going to vote Leave, you know, I overnight started to be dubbed as an alt-right xenophobic racist. And I'd been an anti-racist all my adult, I was involved in anti-racism activity for years and donkeys. I mean, it was horrible. And you wanted to kind of say, I mean, what do? You go, I'm not a racist. And immediately you feel defensive that you're even saying it. I mean, I don't think that foreigners are terrible. I mean, I'm not saying, and you're in this impossible position. So of course, if somebody says to you, so you're anti-gay, so you're a bigot, you're homophobic, you're transphobic, because that's so contentious now, everybody kind of knows that label of transphobic is at least a bit ambivalent. But some of the other labels, if people hear that you're homophobic, they're going to run a mile. If they think you're doing a Clause 20A, which is the code for saying, oh, the state are going to try and stop any kind of positive depiction of people who are gay, regardless of whether that was about in the first place. But nonetheless, people are terrified of that label. And so they keep their head down. Self-censorship is the greatest threat we have to free speech at the moment, not the cancellers. They're kind of out there, we can see them. It's the impact it has, the chilling effect of making people go, do you know what? Maybe I won't say that. Maybe I'll abstain. Maybe I won't be in that day. Maybe I'll just kind of sit there and hope it goes away.
Yeah, there's a lot of it about. I can't let you go without asking you about the online safety bill. Now, the government says that the bill is going to protect vulnerable people from harm and it is going to protect free speech online. Are you convinced?
Absolutely not. But it's a good anecdote in relation to what happens with legislation, I think, which is that there was at some stage some important discussions about what we do in this new world of online, expansion and the potential threats it poses. And we all are aware of young people potentially being groomed by child abusers, or sites such as suicide sites where young people who are self-harming are encouraged to go to suicide sites and sometimes being helped along. I mean, it's gross. We can't even imagine. And the whole world of child pornography on the one hand, and legal but violent pornography being exposed to children. I mean, these are things which and by the way, never mind the fact that you can be defrauded. The online world can kind of try and sell you things that just don't exist. I mean, a government tackling that seems reasonable. It's a hard gig because it's hard to control the online world. That's where it started. It kind of slightly expanded then into, some of the most egregious aspects of social media, which is people being piled on and bullied and called horrible names. I mean, as a victim of that, you could say, great, a bill that might stop people being horrible to me on Twitter. I mean, this would be fabulous. I don't think it's possible, but that's not the point. You can see the appeal. So it went from these quite discrete points to this ever-expanding notion of what is harmful. And now we go back to where we started with the students. I mean, we've reared young people to say that harm is an expanded concept and can be just words. And bullying has moved from, when a child says they're bullied and you think they're getting their head kicked in, to discover that the official anti-bullying guidance includes things like exclusion from friendship groups. You think, what? And then you realise, and that if somebody uses horrible names to you, that this can have a detrimental impact on your mental health for the rest of your life. And you realise the government has adopted this approach in the online safety bill, which is safety trumps freedom in every instance, and harm is so widely understood that that it will capture absolutely everything that constitutes a freedom to speak. So this conversation, if it were posted on social media after the online safety bill is passed, could easily fall foul. I mean, the film itself, as legal but harmful, because some people watching it will find it offensive, and all you will do is you will report that. No, I'm not at all reassured. I mean, the very, very opposite, because they can say that we codify free speech in this law, and you can write those words down, but if you have a huge mammoth piece of legislation that goes around policing all manner of harms that are effectively forms of communication in what has become the public square, to use Elon Musk's definition of Twitter, but it's true, it is the new public square. If you're policing that so stringently, that people self-censor, or they're threatened, or that the companies, the big tech companies that you say you're trying to defang, are given the power to censor you, and threatened that if they don't, they will lose 10% of their income or even face jail, and therefore they're going to be risk averse and deploy the precautionary principle, and they will be taking down fair comment. And so it doesn't matter whether you have codified in the law free speech, or whether you have a Bill of Rights that says free speech is the most important value, which I'm quite supportive of the government saying that, or the new the new higher education academic freedom bill, which rather marvellously, gives some strength to the notion of academic freedom and free speech. But say you're an academic who then goes online, suddenly that freedom has dissipated, and therefore I'm afraid, is the greatest threat to free speech that we all face, this online safety bill. And I really hope that everybody and anybody who has got a smidgen of thought that maybe we need diversity of opinion will oppose it and make the government really think again.
I said you were a fascinating person. It has been fascinating talking to you today. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us.
It's been a pleasure.